Today, we're talking about the moment every single one of us will face: death. Because, spoiler alert, none of us are making it out alive. On this episode, we're asking what actually happens at the end of life. What do people say? What do they see? And is there more happening in those final moments than we understand? Christa Ovenell is an end-of-life doula, licensed funeral director, and death educator. Christa is here to challenge the silence around mortality and to explore what becomes possible when we face it head on. Christa, welcome to Meant to Be Heard.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks, Paige.
We're so happy to have you. Even though the topic might sound a little bit heavy at first, I'm actually very interested and excited to get your perspective and to talk to you about this. I want to fill the listener in really quickly on how we got connected because I do feel it's very synchronistic. My dad was on an airplane and he gets talking to the woman beside him, very chatty, and they talk basically the entire flight. And as a proud father does, he brings up the podcast and what we're doing here and who we're interviewing. And she goes, "Oh, you have to talk to Christa." And he was like, "Okay, well, pass the contact along and I'll give it to my daughters." So that's what happened. I reached out to you and you said yes. So here we
I
are.
sure did. And I am so glad to be here. That synchronicity and that sort of randomness is actually at the very core of being mortal, right? And
Totally.
that's what we're here to talk about.
Amazing. So let's start here, Christa. For people listening who've never heard the term before, what is a death doula? And paint a picture of your day to day.
Sure. End of life doulas, we serve in many capacities. We sort of have four pillars or columns that we might fall into, right? There's people like me who are educating doulas. I'm someone who I educate other doulas, I educate the general public. I do a lot of work in the sort of pre-organizing phase in the helping people get their affairs in order. So that's one pillar, the educating pillar. End of life doulas also do emotional work. We do sitting vigil. We will be with people at the very end of their lives, or we will be with the people who are around the person who's dying. So we're not always vigiling for the person who's dying. We're offering support to the people who are closest to that person. We are very good with things like legacy work and helping people make meaning of their lives. So a lot of us might help people put together love projects, lasting projects, legacy projects, right? And many of us also work in the ceremony space. So we might help people before, during, or potentially after death with things like services, ceremonies, funerals, the new F word that I love so much. So sort of four pillars.
Okay.
And my day to day, I do spend most of my time. I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer as well. And I do spend most of my time in the educational space. So while I am doing those other three things that are so common to end of life doulas, my passion is exactly what we're doing right now, talking about the one thing that we all have in common.
Mm. Thank you so much for being here. And it makes a lot of sense because you have an education background. And I want to get into your career and changing careers because I think that is so fascinating. Because you left a prestigious career as a
I did.
principal of a major Canadian college, and you left that in your 50s. I'm going to
40s,
quote you
but
here.
yes.
In your
Yeah.
40s?
Yeah.
In your 40s.
Late 40s.
In your
Yeah.
late 40s. Okay. In your late
Yeah.
40s. So, and I'm going to quote you here. I decided that my life needed to include death in a radical way. Why?
Because without knowing it, I was really starting to think about the way that understanding death is one of the best ways to understand life. I just had to stop avoiding the call that I was hearing. I had been thinking about moving into death work since my 20s, weirdly, and I know it is a helping profession, and I always wanted to be in a helping profession. And I kept looking up, like, how do I become a funeral director? And it kept being like, oh my God, quit your high paying job, become an apprentice. And that seemed really stupid and wrong. And what kind of person at the kind of peak of their career is like, yeah, I think I'm going to give up this six figures. Do you know, in my first year of apprenticeship, I made less in that entire year as a full-time employed apprentice, funeral director apprentice, than I did in one bonus in my previous job.
Right.
So, like, it was a big change, but
Mhm.
it was one of the best and most important things that I did. And it's
Mm.
why I call my company Death's Apprentice. As I've said before, this is the thing that there is no greater teacher than death. Death is life's greatest teacher. And I embrace the apprentice mindset. I embrace the idea that we can learn about life from death. So,
Mm.
and I just knew that this was the path, but I was kind of a little ashamed. I was definitely nervous. I was worried about the money. And I did it anyway.
Mhm. And so what surprised you the most about death once you started working in it?
That is such a terrific question. One of the things that happened for me was that I had to sort of unlearn a lot of the assumptions that I had about how people die and what happens, because we are so distanced from the act of dying, from death itself in our kind of modern society, that most of us don't know what it really looks like. And what it really looks like isn't anything like the movies. So the thing that I think probably surprised me the most was just how long people can hold on. I am amazed, constantly amazed by people who are having, what you would consider a normal, expected death, perhaps at the end of a very long life, or perhaps at the end of, of an illness, right? So we've got a trajectory that we're kind of anticipating. But boy, oh boy, this piece can go on. I have seen little tiny frail ladies, people that are this big in their beds, and they are 8 days, 9 days, 13 days without having eaten anything, without having had anything to drink, still strength in their grip, not talking by this point, but still present in some way. And that was probably my very biggest surprise, but there's a million others.
So, why do you think people hang on so long at the end of their life?
So I would really like to preface this. While death is a universal experience, if you've seen one death, you've seen one death, right? And so there are similarities all the way through. But when I say that people hang on, or how long it can take, I also just want to really acknowledge that that's not always the case. People can die very suddenly, sometimes unexpectedly during an expected trajectory, or
Mhm.
sometimes just plain unexpectedly, right? So I want to put that out there. So I think that we humans are, well, I know that scientifically we are biologically designed to stay alive. That is our cells' one job. Our cells are supposed to stay alive. And all of our cells staying alive is what keeps us moving and breathing and walking and everything. And we are honestly hardwired for this.
Mm, that's a good answer.
Yeah. Now, from a more spiritual perspective, I think that, and I say spirit in whatever way that moves people, right? But in a less scientific perspective, I do think that there are many people who need to be told it's okay to go. I know that there are people who will hang on for specific things, maybe someone flying home, maybe a goodbye that they haven't experienced yet. And this is well after they're no longer verbal. This is well after they're no longer able to do or say anything. I have also very often been with people who need to be alone. So sometimes when like grandma is holding on, I'll talk to somebody in the family and say, has she had any time to herself? Because if not, maybe everyone should leave for just a few minutes and just see what happens. Often, people who have been caregivers all their life, they don't want to burden someone, right? In their little psychology, that they don't want, oh, I don't want to die in front of her. At some level, cellularly, this is what's going on. Because you can have these vigils set up where they're staying, and finally one person after another leaves the room, and when the room is empty, that's when the person says goodbye finally and slips away. So it's pretty remarkable, actually. as a funeral director, I'm sitting with people afterwards, they're making arrangements, and they might be feeling very guilty that they weren't there. And it's been actually a real gift to be able to say to people, "Hey, you know what? You actually lessened her any suffering for her or for that person by this person left, and they needed to be alone for that to happen."
Right. I'm a new mom. I have a daughter who's a year and a half, and when you swap birth stories with other moms, right? They're all so different. It's the same what you said. If you've seen one death, if you've had one baby, you've had one baby.
You've had one
And
baby.
right.
Exactly.
So it almost feels like the uniqueness of how we entered this world and how we leave this world is the same as the uniqueness of each individual. There's
100%.
billions of people on this planet, and we're all
And then
unique and
we all
different.
it's a universal experience, and it is a very, very, very individual experience. And
Uh-huh.
death doulas have learned and taken so much learning from our birth doula sisters. They are also an unlicensed, unregulated profession. They also emerged in response. It's work that had been done since the beginning of time, just like death doulaing has been, but professionalizing recently. The simple fact is we are both emerging into a response. Birth got medicalized. Doulas came in and said, "Hey, is this exactly what we need? Really? All the time? Maybe sometimes, yes, but not all the time." And death doulas are like, "Wow, we're not dying at home. We're often quite distanced from this. Is that best for us? Sometimes, maybe, but not always." So a
Okay.
ton, like even just professionally, there's connection between the two.
Okay. Let's talk about the end of life for someone because you've sat with people in this place. So, have you witnessed in the final hours of someone's life something that most people don't get to see?
Well, I think that sitting with people at end of life is something that most people don't get to see,
Hmm.
right? And so yes, there are a few experiences that happen often, but not all the time. And one of them is called visioning.
Okay.
And this is a really beautiful thing. It can happen anywhere from a few days to sometimes a week before the death itself occurs to sometimes hours. And what it is someone will gaze off, often towards like the top right or left corner of wherever they are. They will definitely be looking beyond you, sort of a 1,000-mile stare, right? And they will potentially raise their arms. They will reach towards something or somebody. And if they have been very quiet, perhaps nonverbal by this point, they might start talking and they might say things like, "Oh, um, "Oh, my dear," or "It's you," or, I've heard people refer to their dogs. I've been like, come here, boy," things like that. It's like even talking about it, I get goosebumps. It is an incredible thing to witness. Research shows us it happens maybe about a third of the time. That is definitely my experience. It's not every time, but it's pretty incredible. Whatever interaction is happening is genuinely happening. It's not a hallucination. Like the person who is dying is really seeing this other person. It is real to them. And it's very beautiful. I personally have never seen anything that is, "Oh, I'm scared," or "I don't want to see that person." It's all or dog. It's always a really welcome sight. I love
Wow.
that so much.
I think that's really cool, especially if it was someone nonverbal. They'd lost that
Yeah.
ability, and then all of a sudden, here they are saying something. Do you have a specific example from your work that you could tell us?
Oh, well, I'll talk about my mom because I know she wouldn't mind. I typically don't get approval from people that I work with to just be telling everybody stories, right? So I can talk to you about my mom for sure. She started seeing her beloved younger brother, and he had died only a couple of years before. I think he was about 8 or 10 years younger than her in life, but I know that like when Polly came along, he was like the family's beloved. And she started visioning a few days before she died, and she was saying, "Oh, there's Polly. Polly's here. Oh, Polly's playing. Oh, he looks so happy. And when that happened, I was like, okay, we can pretty much set our clocks now that it's going to be anytime in the next sort of few days, right? And it was. And seeing her respond to him, um, and be so happy, I knew that my mom did have some fears around the act of dying itself. And so when Paul was there to maybe greet her or guide her or say, hey, it's okay over here, it was just it was a relief, to be honest.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Do you
Yeah.
remember if she was looking to the left or to the
Yep,
right of the
she was. She
room?
was looking to the left, and she started reaching, like, she had the trifecta. She had all of it. She
Okay. Oh, and it's so special that when she says the name Polly, it means something to you because it was your
Yes,
uncle.
yes,
That's
exactly. I knew
beautiful.
ex and I just, like, and I knew exactly what was happening. There were periods in my mom's final days where I was like, "Oh, not quite sure what she's referring to or asking about." A very common thing, usually not in the final hours, but in the period of transition or in the early part of active dying, people will start talking about, traveling somewhere. People will start talking about needing to make a train, make a plane, pack a suitcase. I have to go. I can't be late. This is, again, like something that happens for so many people. And my mom had been having, probably in the last year of her life, she'd been having a lot of travel metaphors. And my mom had dementia through the last many years of her life. And so when these metaphors started getting woven in, I was like, all right, I know what's happening here. And then in her last days, because there's sort of a transition period of dying, and then there's what we would call active dying, right? And active dying is kind of like active labor in the birth side. Like, you're really working, your body is working to shut down, and in active labor your body is working to bring this new life
Right.
into the world, right? And so there are a lot of things that happen or stop happening
Mm.
during active dying. And so we were probably in more of the transition period when she was still talking, very weak, stopped getting out of bed by this point, had was either eating just minimally or had already stopped eating. And she was like, oh, she would all of a sudden get, oh, gosh, what time is it? And she'd be clear as a bell, and you'd be like, oh, 10 to 3. And then she would say, oh, okay, I'm not sure what I've done with my suitcase. Can you find my suitcase? Yes, mom. Yes, I can find your suitcase,
Oh my
you know?
gosh. It's just
Yeah.
something inside of them is like
Yep.
there's energy of
There
like,
is a
we're not staying
change.
here. We're
We're not
going.
staying here.
Get
Yep.
prepared
We are.
here.
That's exactly it. And our
Wow.
bodies, our mind can only conceive of it
Yeah.
in this way. And so it's the language that we use.
Right. Fascinating. I
Isn't
never
it?
heard of that. So
Oh, it's
the
amazing.
the visions, the
That's right.
traveling metaphors, any other common themes that happen at end of life?
Well, I will say that there's some scientific evidence to support this. We hear until the end. So as we move into active dying, our systems are shutting down, and we're not starving to death. We're not eating because we're dying. It's super simple. It's what has to happen. So, like, tube feeding someone or giving them IV, not a good idea. It will actually lengthen, complicate the dying process, right?
Mm.
When we see people, they stop opening their eyes because it takes muscles to open your eyes, right? Their vocal abilities are really reduced. They might not be able to say anything for days. So slowly, the senses are withdrawing. Hearing is absolutely something that is with us until the end, and maybe moments afterwards as well, who knows. But
Yeah.
and I know this. I know that it is so important to use a modulated voice and to keep the sounds around the person that you would want around that person during a big life event. Death is just a big life event, and frankly, it's the
The
way we should
biggest
treat
one of
it.
them.
It's the biggest.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, it's like it's the second biggest, maybe,
Yeah.
right?
Right, right.
And it's just a big life event. And so in any life event, you might have a soundtrack for it, right? Well, you should at the end of life as well. So
Mm.
it's not really a thing that happens, but it's something that I want to remind people because, for example, perhaps you've gotten, sad news that somebody you love dearly is at the very end and they're still alive. Should I go? Oh, I don't know. Okay. And then you get there and they're not responsive. You might think you're too late. You are absolutely not too late.
Mm,
They can still hear you. And I think if you listen very closely, I think you can probably hear them too.
mm. That really tracks with stories that I've heard from mediums or near death experiences when they get
Oh,
messages from the other side and loved ones of, I heard you, that whisper that you gave at the bedside, or that prayer, or that message that you gave to me, I heard it. So that really tracks. If you have a non-responsive family member or Alzheimer's or things, it might just be that part of them is shutting down. But I love that they can still hear you and they can still receive those messages.
well, and everyone will be non-responsive. If we're having this
Right.
kind of death, if we're having a an expected death with no
Okay.
drama, everyone will become non-responsive
Okay.
at some point
Right.
for, unless something really unexpected happens, like this trajectory is ongoing, but then suddenly they have a heart attack. Okay, that's dying from a different thing. Just this you'll always go through a non-responsive phase, even if you are the most chatty, wild lady at the party, all your life.
I think it also just shows the magnificence of the human body, right? It's just powering down slowly, organ after organ,
That's
sense
it.
after sense.
Our
S
bodies know what to do in birth, and sometimes they need a little bit of assistance, right?
Mhm,
And in death, our bodies know what to do. And
mhm,
sometimes a natural death, not from a horrible, ravaging disease or something, right? But a natural death is not in and of itself painful. The diseases that may accompany you, they could get more painful,
mhm,
and so we have amazing medications now that can help take care of that. There are things we can do to help ensure that the people around the person who's dying are also comfortable. Things like
mm,
the noises as we stop being able to swallow, which is something that happens at the end of life, are secretions, our saliva and whatnot, will pool at the back of our throat. It can make our breathing sound very ragged. That can make people think that we're drowning or that we're uncomfortable. We're not. We're fine. But actually, if suctioning us or using a little bit of medication to dissipate that, to dry that up, if that makes it more comfortable for you, the person who's sitting with the dying person, go ahead. You know, do it.
mhm, mhm. I love that we're having this conversation, Krista, because I just feel like I'm having these realizations and these moments of like, when we don't talk about this, we can't treat death in the way that we really should. We can't honor the people in our lives the way that we should. If we're avoiding it, we're not talking about it. Even when you say, let's be intentional about the sounds that these people are hearing at the end, treating it more like a ceremony, treating it more like that beautiful big event, because we plan so much for birth
Oh
and,
yeah,
making it beautiful in the bath and the twinkly lights and who's in the room and who's
your birth
praying
plan.
and the whole
Yeah.
birth plan and everybody knows it. But when are we talking about the death plan, and when
Well,
are we facilitating that?
you're exactly right, and that's the work of death doulas, right? And think of your birth plan, and then your kid's first day of kindergarten, and then when your kid graduates from school, and then when they go to university, then they finish university, then they get married, and then they retire from work. At every single one of those points, we have a plan in place. And we know what we're doing, and we know who's going to order the cake from Safeway for the retirement party, and we know who's going to get the red paper cups. Eh, we plan everything. Most people put more planning into which phone provider they're going to choose than they do into their deaths. And this
Wow.
is because we have become so distanced as like culturally in a post consumer, post industrial society. We are very distanced. We used to die at home. We don't die at home anymore. In the very near future, we will have to again because there are not enough hospital beds. There are not enough hospice beds. There are not enough long-term care beds for for the baby boomers who are all going to be 65 in a couple more days, basically. And then, between 65 and 90 is when they're all going to die. This is like the biggest demographic. There is literally not space for them. We are going to have to get more comfortable with death and dying because
Mm,
we're all going to have to be participating in it. So we can either be a little proactive and listen to podcasts like this and engage, or we can just pretend that it's not one of the most important things we can ever do in life. You
Oh,
can
that's
guess what I vote for.
yes, I'm totally on board. It's making a lot
Yeah.
of sense. Krista, have you ever felt or sensed the exact moment that somebody has
Oh,
left their body and crossed over? And can you
well, yes.
describe that for the listeners?
Sure. Such a great question, Paige. Have I sensed the exact moment? Maybe. I have been present at the exact moment a number of times. It is such a stillness, and it can sometimes take a moment to notice it, right? And again, there are millions of ways to die, and those of us who are lucky enough to have this kind of end, this peaceful, grace-filled kind of end, incredible, right? Your last breath, inhale, exhale, is just simply not followed by the next breath. Do I always know exactly? Not necessarily, because our breath it's the very last thing to stop, and at the very end, it can sometimes go with like long pauses in between the breath. And so I've definitely sat with people where I'm like, leaning forward and like, oh, no, there it goes again, right?
Mm,
And then sometimes you'll just be like, oh, right, that has stopped. And sometimes there's a noise accompanying it, an inhale,
mhm.
and sometimes it's so quiet you honestly might not even hear it. What I will say is that as soon as it is noticed, there is this shift in the room.
Okay.
And there is a difference between the person who was in the bed or wherever, usually beds, and then the person who is there after.
Mm,
Everything is different. And there is almost a relaxation maybe. I have had the honor of being with people who've died with significant illnesses, right? And one of the things that I am so struck by is the absence of pain. The absence of pain shows on our faces, on our dead faces,
mm,
in our dead bodies. There is a peace there. In the hours, minutes before death, when we haven't eaten for a few days and whatnot, there's a translucence to our bodies and to our skin that can glow the way your beautiful cheeks are glowing right now. But you
mhm.
don't think of dead people as being beautiful typically, but often they really are. Now, not to romanticize it too much, because you often also look like, with your mouth open and your eyes rolled back, you really do. And there's still beauty in that, but there's a translucence and an almost a glow to a recently dead body that is incredibly special.
So when you say when they pass on,
How
there
about
it's a
when they
different
die?
when they die. Okay. You're like, let's just
How
call it what
about
it is.
how about that?
When they die, you say everything is different. You're looking at this body and
Yeah.
everything is different. Does it feel like it feels lifeless?
Yes. It
Yes.
feels lifeless. It feels like something indescribable is missing.
Mhm.
Essence, soul, spirit, there's so many words for it,
Mhm.
but
Right.
it's not there anymore.
Right. You can look at the other living people in the room and say this is definitely very different than this.
This is definitely very different.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay. Fascinating.
yeah.
And you don't have to, say names, anything. You
Of
can make it
course.
very, very vague. But is there ever a time that you've experienced something at the bedside that you were just like, I can't explain that?
Mm. Well, I can't really explain the visioning. And I've
Right.
seen that a lot, right? It's like we can't see it just in our regular days, but it's
Yeah.
clearly just right there.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't have to be in one specific room. You don't have to be in like, oh, it's only if you're in this hospital room that you can see the other side. Like it's wherever people are. So it's all around us. But I have been present where minutes after someone has died, there's been a great deal of silence and softness in the minutes passing, and where it's hard to explain, but and I've only seen it a couple of times, but where the body is definitely dead for many, many minutes, and there will be like a wind. It's not exactly a wind, but it is like like a flow, like you could see if you were holding a piece of paper, it might rattle kind of thing.
Mm,
And I've seen, and it's not at death, it's many minutes after,
mm.
and like windows aren't open, and so it's kind of like hard to explain what that is. And I've witnessed that a few times, not very many, but I have definitely been present for that.
And when that has happened, everybody in the room feels it. It's
Yeah.
a collective, "What was
Yeah.
that?"
What was that? Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Have you thought about what that could have been? Or do you talk about that with the family?
Um, do I talk about it? I want to be very sure that I'm not directive.
Mhm.
It's funny, as a funeral director, I have to direct some things, and other things I really want to be sure that I'm not sort of putting my print on. So I will ask sometimes, that this one time, this was like now days after the person had died, and it was in my role as a funeral director. I was driving the hearse. The eldest daughter of the person who had died was beside me, and the casket was in the back. We were doing something called a drive-by, which is in certain Asian cultures, you will drive through the community that the person lived in, and you will stop at important places, maybe their business, maybe their home or homes that they had lived in, and you open the back of the hearse and just spend a moment ceremonially, right? So I'm doing this, and we're at like the third place, and it's the home that this gentleman had lived in longest and raised his three girls in. And open the door, and I'm standing there. There's a long group of cars following me. Daughter, as I said, is with me as well. She's like, okay, we can go now. I closed the thing. Now I had turned off the hearse each time because sometimes we'll idle for ages, and I just didn't want to be polluting, right? So I turned off the car. I get in and I turn the car, and it just won't start. And I'm like, "What is happening?" I'm like, "Am I doing something wrong?" And like, it was really kind of, and then I look at the girl and I'm like, "I'm really sorry. I think we're gonna need a jump." And that, as an aside, that was one of the funniest things ever because it was these damn Buddhist monks that ended up giving me the jump. It was hilarious. It was honestly one of the funniest sort of roadside experiences I've ever had. But it did kind of mess with the flow of our very somber event. I get back in, the hearse is running now, and our hearse did not have any, like, it wasn't some beaten up, hearse or whatever. And I get in and I'm like mortified. And this girl looks at me, this adult child of the person who's died. She looks at me and she goes, "This was his favorite place. Maybe he just wanted more time here." And I
Mhm.
and I was like, that kind of makes perfect sense to me. There was no reason that our hearse should have stopped working. No earthly reason
Mhm.
that our hearse should have stopped. So that was,
Mhm.
that wasn't at time of death, but that was after. Just maybe that
Right.
counts.
Yeah, it counts. There's something also to be said about that's where her mind went
Yep.
first, right?
Yep.
She's like, "You know what? Maybe dad's just saying hi and he just
Yeah.
wants to enjoy this a little longer."
Totally.
Krista,
Totally.
do you personally think that consciousness lives on outside after the body dies?
100%.
Mm,
For me, it's just super simple. I mean, energy cannot be created or destroyed. Just simple like that. It's like proven. It's empirically based. I don't care what religious or irreligious, atheist, theist, like whatever you are, your cells are a collection of energy.
mhm,
That energy cannot be created nor destroyed.
mm.
So, yeah, it absolutely does.
Do you feel like what you've witnessed or what you've seen proves that as well?
Yeah, I really do believe, and there's so many conversations that are similar, right? You had mentioned that you've spoken to mediums or you've spoken to people who've had NDEs, near death experiences. How is it that these things are the same? It doesn't matter. The person you're talking to could be 60 or 6, well, probably not 6, but 16, and they could be, Buddhist, atheist, or Christian or Muslim, and they have these similar stories. Like, how is that happening?
Mhm.
You know,
Do people confide in you at the end of life?
Yes, people confide in me at the end of life. I do a lot of work with people before they know that they're
Okay.
dying. And I am very honored to say that people confide in me. We've probably all seen like the memes, nobody ever wishes they worked more at the end of life. Yeah, that's all true. Many of our fears are quite similar. There is definitely a desire to mend before we end. And as a person, I know that in my life, intentionally or otherwise, I know that I've caused harm to others. If at the end of life, like, I hope that I have mended, any harm that I've caused, and if I haven't, then I would really want to ensure that people knew that I was still working towards that, but how that is received is totally up to them.
Would you say that that's one of the most common things if there were regrets or if there are desires of wanting to do something, it's to make amends, it's that forgiveness, it's yeah, make amends with somebody that maybe there was bad
It's
blood or
It's definitely something that I see. Sometimes, the way we've lived is the way we die, and often when you think of, like, fractured relationships, often there's somebody who is not very self-aware, and sadly, I don't think that dying gives us a lot like, doesn't give us a pipeline to self-awareness. So it's not a
Mhm,
cure-all, dying.
mm,
Doesn't necessarily change the person that we are. In fact, what I've seen more often is people being even more like themselves at the very end, which can be extremely beautiful,
mhm,
and it can have its, ups and downs too, that's for
right.
sure.
When you say, you die the way you lived, what do you mean by that? Because I have heard that term before, and I'm curious what that means.
I think that, people who are very unself-aware, people who are not curious, people who live in a lot of denial, they will often really be in a lot of denial, and like they will have such fear of death that
Mm,
they will not try and meet it and try and understand it. And there's a resistance, and I think that can cause less comfortable, less graceful deaths,
mm,
like deaths full of grace, right? And so that's what I mean. I think
mhm,
that people who are curious and people who are open and people who are willing to kind of look at hard things, I think that often they can approach their own deaths with that same kind of mindset. Now,
mm,
I think that's a little bit easier to do when you're 87 and very privileged and, have every bit of health and help around you and easily accessible. That's quite easy to do, right? If you're 34 and the mother of three kids under five, and you have had your SNAP benefits cut, and you know that your kids are going to go into care when you die, like, hmm. Is it death is not the great equalizer, and I think that's really important. Inequities exist at end of life and after end of life as well, and it's one of the reasons that I really push back on this idea of, like, the good death, that's not a helpful narrative. We can have a peaceful death, we could have a gentle death, but calling one death good and therefore another death bad, is that really helpful in the whole scheme of things? No,
mm.
probably not.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Have you heard about the book Top 5 Regrets of the Dying?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you read
Yeah.
that one? Or do you
Yes,
know
I
the top
have, and
5?
yeah, can I rattle
I
them off?
have
But
them listed here, so
working
I
more
wanted
okay,
to
go for
see
it,
if
yeah.
they resonate with,
Yeah.
what you've practically experienced. So, had the courage to live a life true to
Uh-huh.
themselves, maintained friendships, worked less, which you had mentioned earlier, expressed their feelings more, and allowed themselves to be happier.
Yes, yes, those are perfect, and I've skimmed the book and whatnot. There is a beautiful speaking of 5, there's a beautiful book by Frank Osaseki. I can never say his name, Frank Osaseki, and his book is called The 5 Invitations. Frank was an early leader in the hospice movement and a Buddhist himself, and he sat with and nurtured so many volunteers as well who sat with people who were dying. And his 5 invitations are so beautiful. They mirror those, they're not identical, but I would maybe put it in the resources or something. It's a great book. It's a similar, it's deeper, right? It's a wonderful book.
Who would you recommend read this book?
Everyone, mortals?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 5 invitations are: don't wait, embrace the present moment and live fully without waiting for a later time, welcome everything, push away nothing, practice radical acceptance and openness, even to difficult emotions or situations. Number 3, bring your whole self to the experience, show up authentically with compassion rather than fear or pity. Number 4, find a place of rest in the middle of things. Cultivate inner stillness and presence, even amidst the chaos. And 5, cultivate don't know mind. Release
Yes.
expectations and preconceived notions, staying open to the mystery of the moment.
So my company, Death's Apprentice,
Okay.
education and planning, it is number 5. I live number 5 every single day.
Mm.
Embracing the apprentice mindset is the beginner's mindset is the way that I can sort of get up and go to bed every day in a way that I'm like actively living my legacy. Not knowing is something that is so much more powerful than we think of it in our modern society. Where, oh, gosh, like how quickly were you able to look that up, right? Those
Mhm.
5 invitations up. It's hard to not know anymore in our modern world, and yet not knowing and embracing the not knowing mindset, oh, so incredibly powerful.
I've noticed that through my daughter, because just seeing the world through her eyes and the amount that she learns and she picks things up, and it's like, but she's constantly every single day she's got a beginner's mind. She doesn't know. She
Yep.
doesn't pretend like she knows, but you're so right in that a lot of us we become experts, or we get stuck in something, or we've been in a career for a really long time and we know it all, but then it really closes us off to the mysteries and the learning and expanding our awareness.
Yeah.
If someone listening is afraid of dying,
Yes.
what do you want them to know?
That it's okay to be afraid of the unknown, that you can be afraid and you can do it anyway.
What's the best way that we can support someone at the end of their life? If we know that it's the end of their life
The
and
end of
it's,
their life?
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that one of the best ways is to be present and show up for the people who are tending that person as well. So if the person who's dying is at the very center, then you're going to have these circles of care that kind of radiate outward, and you might be somewhere on those outer circles, so you may not need to show up for the person who's dying, but maybe you need to show up for the person who is showing up for the person who's dying. That's one of the best ways that we can more readily integrate dying into living, right? Is to acknowledge that each of us may have somebody somewhere who we are tending to, who we are caregiving for, and like being more village-like in our approach. I think that uh trusting, listening, asking what do you need, and then listening to the person from a very, very practical perspective. When someone says they're not hungry or they don't want water, stop bringing it to them. Do not put, like in a hospital setting or a long term care setting, you might have to specifically say, my person, my dad, no longer is asking for food. Please stop bringing in the tray and leaving it to smell up the room, right?
Mhm.
In any hospice setting, you would always get this, but sometimes there's like well meaning medical people who are like, "Oh, maybe we should try giving her some hydration or what." No. Whatever they want, yes, give it to them. But if they haven't asked for it, do not force it. That is one of the best ways to support people who are dying. Asking questions. If you already know that they don't like cold drafts, then close the window. If you already know that they love having a light cotton sheet on them, go get that light cotton sheet, right? So at some point they won't be able to answer, so use your own head. But up until they can answer, what do you want? What can I bring you? Is there anything? And respect their rhythms. As we die, we sleep more and more, just like our little newborns who are sleeping like 22 hours a day, right? And then slowly they get into being awake for 18 hours a day, right? Well, at the end of life, it goes in the opposite direction. And so, God, being on a schedule is just so crazy. In all of North America, you can, on behalf of someone, you can refuse care. You can say, actually, we don't need to take their vitals anymore. Just because we're in your hospital setting on your clock, we know this person is dying. Thanks very much. Appreciate all you've done. Stop putting a thermometer in their ear, up their bum, in their face, in their mouth, whatever. We don't need to know what their temperature is anymore. So being like advocate right up until the very end, an advocate for comfort instead of an advocate for someone else's systems. These are other ways. So you'll see, I had a
Mm.
long list of ways that
You
we can.
do, yes. I'm seeing the value in hiring a death doula because
There you
these
are.
are very practical
Yeah.
and make a lot of sense, but
Yes.
essentially make them as comfortable as you can and listen to them,
And
which
listen to
makes a
them.
lot of sense. What do you think people get wrong about death and dying?
Oh, well, I think that people think it's very quick. I think people think that it is, while it's a universal experience, that they might know more than they do.
Mhm.
I think that people think that they can sometimes outsmart it, and you just can't. I think that people get wrong the fact that they think of it as when I'm dying. Oh, at some future date. Sorry, when I'm dying. Plan for right now. And then revisit your plans. How would you want to be cared for right now if your life were to be coming to an end? How would you like to be cared for right now? Make that known. And then in 2, 5, 10 years, revisit, make sure those things are still true. And maybe some of them will have changed, you know? And maybe they haven't, but the only way that we can really kind of answer what would I want when I'm dying is to actually think about it as something that could, might, may happen right now.
Yeah. So I'm 36. Are you saying myself, anyone listening, it's something that we should talk about now, not to wait till we're in our
Yes,
60s or 70s or
yes.
80s?
When is the best time to do your end of life planning, to do work on the kind of care that you would like to receive right now?
Okay.
Right now.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I don't know if most of my friends have ever talked about that with their
No,
spouses or, right? It's just not something that you
no.
really do. So that's a great reminder. And thank you.
And it's something that I see all the time, and then nobody
Mm,
knows, right? And we're all guessing. And, "Oh, maybe she would want this, maybe she would want that." No, why can't we just make this part of our it
let's
is
just talk about it.
just part of life, so
Right.
why don't we treat it that way?
Right. I'm hoping that through these conversations and people listening to these conversations that we can make it a bit more normal to talk about, not so taboo.
Yes!
Why do you think it is such a taboo topic, or why do you think as a society we're so afraid to, not only to die but to talk about death?
Well, I will say that, there are cultural differences, right? So there are some cultures and societies who are very death embracing. If you think of
Mm,
like the week-long celebrations of the Day of the Dead, or almost month-long celebrations in like, for example, Mexico, right? Or the grave sweeping ceremonies that take place in some Asian cultures, like ancestor venerating societies are not as afraid of death as societies like mine here in Canada. White Western sort of views on youth and the anti-aging kind of rhetoric that you have all around you. This all contributes to it. So it is. So I'm a white middle old lady now, and so this is I'm speaking for I used to say middle age. I'm like, there's no way I'm middle aged. I'm 56. I'm definitely more than halfway through. I hope I'm more than halfway through. Um, when we ask the question, why are we so averse to death? I just really want to remind us that we're talking about like certain specific cultures. And people who look like me, the answer is this. People who don't look like me, the answer can be very different,
okay.
right? But a big piece is that we stop dying at home 100-ish, 150 years ago, and so death was no longer something that we were used to. I know how to can peaches, and I know how to preserve things and to ferment things and stuff like that, but that's my mother taught me and her mother taught her and whatnot. And my kids know how to do this, but not everybody, like my kids' age, knows how to do that, right? Because we stopped doing, we just started buying the damn peaches. Well, we just started buying the damn death care at the funeral home or perhaps at the hospital or whatnot. And we stopped doing it ourselves. So we stopped knowing how to do it because we stopped teaching each other how to do it. And I often say we all know how to be death doulas. We just need to be reminded. We
Mm,
all know it's in us, right? But we just need to be reminded of these skills.
mm,
So when we stopped dying at home, we started getting afraid of death because we are afraid of the unfamiliar. And it's no longer familiar if we've kind of institutionalized it and hidden it away. And
mm,
the only way that we are going to be able to reconnect to it is to deinstitutionalize it and stop hiding it away.
mhm. Right. It's so similar to birth. It's so
Hmm.
similar to birth, doing it in the hospital and yeah, not teaching the generations and doing it in community and doing it as a village. So it's all just very foreign to us and then we don't
That's
talk
right.
about it and
And then we're just
not
like, oh, I guess that's what we're supposed to do.
right.
But no.
But no, okay. Is
Yeah.
there a nationality or a culture that you think gets death right, that celebrates it, that does it in, I don't know, a way
Oh,
that we could learn
yeah,
from
I
in
will
our
say
Western
that
culture?
Buddhism, so that's not a culture or a country. I will say that it's a major world religion though, and there is in Buddhist tradition there is a death meditation practice that is very common. So this idea of imagining yourself dead can help connect you to what matters most while you are alive. So it's funny when I first started practicing, I found a lot of Buddhists were drawn to my practice. And then I was like, "What?" Because I didn't know Buddhism at all. And I was like, "What is going on here?" And then I started learning some of and I was like, right, that makes sense. So that apprentice
Okay.
mentality and that willingness to engage in the contemplation of death. Think about the rest of our societies, right? Like elements of our society day to day. No, do not think about this. It's like absolutely not. Whereas there is actually an inherent practice of the death meditation.
Mm,
And I think that's key right
mm.
there.
It's definitely getting my wheels turning, thinking about my own mortality and not in a bad way, in a good way. So I
Yes.
hope the listeners are finding that as well. Um, what would you say to somebody who feels called to something else, but might feel like it's too late?
Yeah, it's totally not too late. It's just not too late. Are there small steps you can take? It took me a long time to take the big step, and I had a lot of things in place to allow me to do that. Actually, because I had been making so much money, I lived very simply then and now. And so I had been able to sort of save a bit of a nest egg. Now, not everybody is going to be able to do that. So the big radical step that's going to take you from your fancy job or whatever, maybe that's not going to be approachable for everybody. But what are the little steps that you can take to get you into alignment so that even if you can't do the big thing, you are on a path to whatever that is? What you do have is the agency to say what step will take me a little bit closer to this thing that I want to do or this thing that I'm thinking. And it can start as small as saying it out loud.
Mm.
Say the thing out loud. And once you've said it to yourself, find somebody to tell. And it is amazing. You can speak things into existence. But if you are too shy and too embarrassed to even say it out loud, you're not working towards that alignment.
I love it. Like when you, what you mean by that is like vocalize what you want. Like, I want to be a
Right.
funeral director. I want to
Uh,
be a death doula. I don't know how it's going to happen or where or what the path is, but this is something I want. Starting
yeah.
there, naming it
Yep.
instead of being afraid or ashamed or
Yep.
nervous to vocalize it, even to yourself.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And take small steps.
Little steps, but steps nonetheless.
But steps.
But steps. So, this
Yeah.
is a great transition, Krista. Let's talk about Death's Apprentice, what you offer, who reaches out to you. If people are like, I'm so interested, I want to talk about this more, I want to chat with Krista, like who talks to you and how can people reach out to you?
Sure. Well, so deathapprentice.ca is my website. And actually, that's my Instagram handle as well. And one of the best things about social media is right there in the title, social media. Often I'll be like, hey, ask me anything or whatever. The folks that show up in my inbox, there's not a robot that's responding. Well, actually, you will get a welcome message. That's a robot. But after that, it's
It's really
really
you?
me. It's
Okay.
really me. And I love the questions. I have a weekly newsletter. I call it the least exclusive club, the world's least exclusive club.
That's
And
amazing.
and that's a wonderful thing. And folks, it sort of talks about everything because guess what? Death touches every aspect of life. So that's one way.
Hmm.
I do offer 3 times a year a wonderful foundation program called the Doula Foundations Intensive. It's just 8 weeks long on a weekend, a few hours, wonderful reading lists, incredible community, and very affordable and designed to be something that is like, don't quit your day job, right? So,
Amazing. Okay, I'll have everything linked in the show notes. Christa, one
wonderful.
final question for you. What has working so closely with death taught you about living?
Working so closely with death has taught me to really think every single day about connecting to my breath and connecting to the fact that this thing that I do unconsciously in without even thinking about is like a mirror of every single beginning and ending that any of us face. And we do this over and over and over, and our system does it for us autonomously. And witnessing, working with, being with, caring for bodies after that breath is no longer a part of them is such an honor. And our bodies still deserve reverence when our spirit is gone. And we can, in just the simplest ways, connect intentionally to the fact that we are mortal. And when we do that, we live better. That's what this last nearly decade has taught me.
Mm. It's like not taking it for granted and being more
That's
intentional and
totally it.
present.
And present. That
Beautiful.
is totally it. Yeah.
Krista,
So
this has surprisingly been such a fun conversation.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah, you are such a delight. And I just thank you so much for your time. Thank you for what you're doing in the world. And thank you so much for being on the
It
podcast.
was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Meant to Be Heard. If this episode resonated, please share it with a friend, rate the podcast, and hit follow so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at You're Meant to Be Here with a 2. New episodes drop Mondays. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you're meant to be here.